Steam lifts from a cord-marked pot in a thin, patient ribbon, and you can almost taste the sea and chestnuts in it as the night fire sighs and settles. Clay warm under your fingertips, wet where you just dipped your hand. A soft sheen where fat rises and blurs the surface. You ease a log aside, nudge a coal forward, and watch how the kettle steam curls along the lid and slips back as tiny rain, feeding the stew and calming the vessel's skin. You probably won't survive this if you blast the flames like instant noodles on a camping stove and hope the pot forgives you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit close to the hearth, not so near that your knees complain, not so far that you miss the little conversations between fire, liquid, and clay. The chords that once bit the surface left their memory in raised ridges. Your thumb can follow without looking. They help you grip, yes, but they also catch droplets. And if you half close your eyes, the shimmering beads become a small constellation, starlight written in broth. You hold the ladle like a promise and stir not in circles but in brief, quiet arcs that do not bully the bottom. The pot responds with a low, even murmur. No clacking, no snapping, just the sleepy sound of starches deciding to be kind. You learn quickly that the trick is not one trick, it is a rhythm. Heat asks for a ramp, not a ladder. You let the pot meet warmth sideways, pre-warmed by the fire's edge, a little damp along its belly before you expect it to bear the bubbling heart of dinner. The Jōmon people knew this cadence across long seasons. Build the vessel, yes, but also learn its mood and the hearth's geometry, the way wind across courtyards slips under a pot if you leave just enough air to walk there. You slide 3 stones so their shoulders carry the weight evenly, and you listen for the change in the boil from eager to settled, from slap to whisper. You offer yourself one clean fact to tuck behind your ear. Cord-marked pottery in the Japanese archipelago, what we call Jōmon, the cord-patterned culture, ranks among the oldest in the world, with early forms appearing deep in prehistory. The dates can feel like stars, far away and bright. Keep them soft. What matters in your hands is that people here boiled stews and soups long before metal kettles ever argued with flames, and they did it without turning pots into piles of sorry shards. That's the proof you feel rising in tonight's gentle steam. A small joke keeps your jaw relaxed. If you treat a clay pot like a cast iron pan on turbo, you don't get dinner, you get an archaeology project. You smile at your own caution and lean in for the pot's quiet breath. Steam brushes your cheek, and you think of clay dust in sunbeams from afternoon work. The way your palms remembered the damp weight as you lifted the vessel toward the door, where light made every finger line look like a river. You turn the pot just enough that a new patch of rim faces the warmth. Not a spin, just a polite nod. It spreads the stress the way a hammock shares weight between 2 trees. Clay stretches a little as it warms, contracts a little as it cools. You make that change slow, so the wall can yawn instead of yelp. You check the lid, just a leaf and a thin slab, really, and let a slip of vapor escape so the simmer stays at that smiling line between bored and excited. If it blurts, you ease a coal away. If it sulks, you slide a splinter in. You and the fire keep a conversation that never needs to shout. There is a fringe tidbit you learned from an older hand whose fingers had more stories than your entire bundle of kindling. First steaming, they called it. Before cooking anything precious, you fill the new pot with clean water and a handful of harmless greens, seaweed if you're near shore, needles if you're inland, and let it hush at the edge of the fire until the water sighs once or twice. It wakes the clay, they said, and brings the tiny pores into agreement. Is it chemistry or courtesy? You refuse to choose. Both have kept more suppers whole than swagger ever will. Your ears do part of the work. A busy boil rattles the rim. A good simmer sounds like lamp glow turned into music, low, even unhurried. You could measure temperature, but tonight you measure metaphors. The stew thickens, and with it the risk of stick and scorch, so you scrape the bottom lightly with the back of the ladle, not the edge, just enough to remind starch where to float. When you lift, you do it straight and steady. Someone somewhere is tempted to use the pot handle like a drum carry. Resist the urge to play percussion. The rim likes attention, not applause. Historians still argue whether the very first Jōmon cooks set vessels directly into open flame or mostly nested them over coals and stones, letting hot air, not hot tongues of fire, do the heavy lifting. You listen to both sides the way you listen to two wind paths at a doorway and choose whichever makes the least fuss tonight. Your stones give you an air channel that keeps heat sliding under the belly without scolding any one spot. You can lift the pot if you must. 2 lugs make it possible, but you treat that as an exercise, not a habit. Clay prefers steady footing. You stir again and think about what goes inside these nights. Fish if the tide was friendly, shellfish if the shore had a mood, nuts and acorns leached and kind after a long bath if the trees were generous. That's another quiet truth. Pots here did more than boil fish. They tamed tannins and turned bitter into nourishment. You feel the stew's thickness, change at the edges, and remember how water once rippled in a cistern when you touched it gently. Same law, different dinner. Small motions move a lot if you time them right. You keep one eye on the wind. A draft sneaks from the doorway, a cousin of that courtyard breeze you love to invite across sleeping rooms. You angle your body to shield the flame's temper and prevent a sudden lick from patting the pot too hard. The hearth learns your posture and behaves. You learn the hearth's appetite and feed it in crumbs, not fists. The social room around you is busy, even when quiet. Someone checks wood, someone rinses a ladle with care, someone else hums a tune with a drum cadence so gentle you could mistake it for your own heartbeat. A child counts the long bubbles. An elder tells you without looking, rotate the rim just a finger, and you do. Work lives in layers. The person who shaped the coil and smoothed the seam is not always the one who tends the soup, but your hands overlap in a shared promise. Competence is communal here. There are no gatekeepers at the pot, only caretakers. A second joke floats up with the steam. This is slow cooking, not because slowness is sacred, but because the pot has a personality and you'd like to stay friends. You grin, half at yourself, half at the pot's patient answer. Somewhere outside, sandal crunch on the path says someone returns from the water with a basket that smells like the tide. You lift the lid, let 3 shells slide in, and watch how the surface changes its breath to welcome them. When you think of tomorrow, you picture soot on the pot's skirt, a soft glaze of use that makes future meals calmer. Seasoning is not only for metal. Clay grows wise when it learns each fire's voice. Later you will rinse with warm water, not a scouring rage with grit, and let the vessel dry by lamp glow. Turn so air can stroll past each curve. But that is another hour. Now you mind the simmer. If you press a fingertip to the outside and it feels evenly warm, you're doing it right. If one patch scowls, you soothe it by shuffling a coal as if tucking in a blanket. You won't flip the pot or dunk it or dare it to be heroic. You keep court with it. The pot stays uncracked because you ask it to do the possible, and you make the possible gentle. Outside, wind slides through trees. Inside, steam writes thin curls that vanish just where your nose expects them. The night is not a test, it is a lesson in pacing. When the stew finally surrenders its stubbornness and tastes like it remembers the ocean and the wood at once, you lift the ladle and bless your past self for patience. No shards, no surprises, only supper and a vessel that will still be here in the morning. At first light, you follow the river's slow elbow, sandal crunch soft on damp sand, hunting places where the bank slumps and reveals a vein the color of wet tea. You pinch a bit, roll it between thumb and forefinger, and feel whether it holds together like patient bread dough or sulks and crumbles like a shy cookie. You don't need lab goggles, just the quiet courage to touch earth and listen. When you fold the pinch back on itself and it doesn't crack right away, you nod. When it smears across your skin with too much eagerness, you frown playfully and say, "Nice personality, but you're clingy." The river, uninterested in your jokes, keeps moving. You scoop a basket with a flat shell, lifting clay and some sand, a few tiny roots, a surprise pebble that taps your palm like a polite request to be returned. Under the trees, palm leaf shade in your imagination, even if the fronds belong to another forest. You set your tools: a woven strainer, 2 gourd bowls and strainers, one with clear levigation water, one with slip, woven sieve propped nearby, edges wet, reflect lamplight, a stick smoother than a lullaby. Clay dust rises later in golden sunbeams and makes the morning look like a workshop full of tiny planets. You keep your breathing gentle, no need to inhale a galaxy, then sprinkle river water and mix. Not like a smoothie, please don't overblend your future dinnerware, but like a slow batter that promises to thicken if you're kind. You know what the pot asked of you last night? A body that won't panic when stew begins to simmer. That means removing sharp surprises and adding calm company. You break clods with the heel of your hand, then press the paste through the strainer. Pebbles complain and stay behind. Fibers dream of being baskets and accept their fate. The slip slides into the bowl with a dignity that says, "Handle me like a guest." You let the mixture settle. In a few breaths, ripples in the gourd cistern smooth to glass. Heavy grains drop first. Finer clay clouds drift down after, and you decant the top water with a steady hand. Levigation, a fancy word that means listen to gravity. One clean fact to keep friendly. In this archipelago, people shaped and fired pottery many thousands of years ago, roughly 14 millennia by the counting, most often quoted, long before bronze ever considered introducing itself. Some of the earliest vessels known anywhere on Earth come from these valleys and shores. You do not say it like a museum label, you let it be a quiet assurance that your morning chores stand in a long, confident line of hands. Now the temper. You sift dry sand you gathered from a higher bar where grains feel rounder and more polite. In another bowl you lay crushed shell, white flakes like soft snow, and in a third you keep a little grog, ground bits of old, fired sherd from a pot that did its years of service and retired into wisdom. Temper is not seasoning, you're not spicing soup. You're inviting guests into the clay who will refuse to let it sulk into a single, brittle block. Each grain interrupts shrinkage, spreads stress, and offers tiny pathways for heat to travel without throwing tantrums. You whisper the physics to yourself the way you'd hum a lullaby. Expansion, conduction, crack deflection, easy, easy, easy. A fringe tidbit you love. An older maker once taught you the tongue truth. Touch a dry test shard to your tongue. If it clings for a blink, the body is thirsty and porous in a helpful way. If it falls off like a bored gecko, the surface may have closed up too tight. Yes, you giggled the first time. Yes, you looked around to see if anyone saw you lick a potsherd. No, the river did not judge. You combine clay and temper in patient ratios, aiming for a pace that bends before it breaks. Add too much sand and the coil will crumble when you ask it to climb. Add too little and the pot will sulk in the fire like a guest who came overdressed to a picnic. You knead with a rhythm you learned from a drum cadence tapped on a canoe housepost in another story. Press, fold, turn, press, fold, turn. Driving bubbles out, aligning platelets, persuading the mass to become a community instead of a crowd. When a soft sheen blooms and the paste stops sticking to your knuckles, you rest it beneath a damp cloth where wind across courtyards can't sneak in and chap it. Historians still argue whether plant fiber temper visible in some prehistoric shards was a deliberate thermal shock strategy, or mostly a forming aid that burned away and just happened to leave forgiving pores behind. You smile at the thought that useful outcomes sometimes arrive wearing accidental shoes. You've fired bodies with a little chopped fiber when supplies were thin. The smell at first is country kitchen, then the fire eats the fiber's softness and leaves a path map for steam. Intention and serendipity shake hands more often than pride admits. While the levigated batch settles again, you walk the bank for another color. In a cut shaded by roots, you find a cooler gray. Mix a thumbful with last bowl's leftover, and the paste relaxes, as if two temperaments decided to share a bench. Region matters. Clays change their minds from hill to hill. Some carry fine mica that glints in lamp glow. Some hide silt that shrinks like a gossip story under scrutiny. You keep notes in your head and in your hands. Later, when you tap a dry test tile and it sings a small bell instead of a dull thud, you'll know you balance density with breadth. In the village space above the river, work braids into social threads. 2 people dig, 3 sift, 1 keeps water, another repairs a basket with a needle so graceful it might as well be a bird. Children collect shell fragments and are deputized to say, "No sharp edges," a job they perform with fierce joy. A cousin, who pretends not to be a perfectionist, arrives with obsidian from a bartered trip inland. The flakes will scrape leather-hard rims to fairness later. No guild crest here, but roles exist, practiced and admired. Everyone knows a pot's calm in the fire begins with this dusty patience, and so the dusty patience gets respect. You spread a little clay on a flat board and scratch 4 squares into it. In each you mix a different temper blend. Sand-rich, shell-rich, grog-lean, and a control with none at all. When they dry to a stage that potters call leather-hard, you bend each square over your forearm and watch for stress lines along the outside curve. The one with no temper frowns first. The one with only shell behaves better than rumor claims, but seems a touch brittle. Sand does a fine job, Grog smiles, because it has already met the fire once and knows how not to be dramatic. You don't crown a winner, you compose a chorus. A bit of each, in proportions your hand has learned to trust, makes a voice you want to hear simmering at dusk. Another friendly joke to keep your shoulders from climbing towards your ears. When someone says, "Let's just use pure clay, it's more authentic," You hear, "Let's serve soup in a sugar bowl," and act surprised when it melts. Authenticity without physics is a hat without a head. You grin, quietly, at the board. By midday, the sun finds your workspace and fills it with clay dust in sunbeams, a cathedral made of specks. You move the bowls a little to keep them in gentle light, not glare. Heat can hurry, drying in a way that looks helpful, until the edges race ahead of the center and everything warps like a bad memory. You shift to the shade again, because shade is a craft tool, not a luxury. You can almost hear the future pot say thank you. You lift one bowl and swirl the slip. The ripples close behind the stick like silk drawn across a table. Good. You pour off the extra water and meet the paste again, this time kneading in the temper you chose from the morning's bending test. The mass darkens a shade and gains a fine grit you can barely feel but fully trust. If you roll a coil now, it will stretch like a yawn, not snap like a complaint. You set the parcel under damp cloth again, because rest builds strength as surely as work does. Your teacher's proverb lands in your ears for the 1000th time. Clay that sleeps in shade wakes kinder in fire. Lamp glow will arrive later, when you carry these prepared bodies inside to wait for tomorrow's coiling. For now, afternoon invites a last check. You flatten a small pancake of each mix, scratch the date with a twig, just a moon and a dot, your private code, and leave them where a breeze can walk past but not gossip. Nobody steps on them. Everyone knows their future decisions. Another debate nominates itself for a walk around your thoughts. Historians still argue whether early riverside choices were guided by trial and error pragmatism alone, or whether clays and tempers carried ritual associations that steered hands as strongly as experience did. You decide it's kind to assume both, gesture and data, song and test, because people rarely divide their wisdom into tidy piles. By evening, the bank quiets. You gather your bowls, brush your hands, and listen to the river's steady voice, the best drum cadence for a maker who wants to fall asleep without inventing problems. Tomorrow you'll coil to that rhythm, but tonight you stack your prepared slabs like folded blankets, each one a promise that the next pot will meet the fire like an old friend, and the stew like a happy conversation. As you turn home, the sky begins to blue, and a small wind touches your cheek. It smells faintly of wet earth and tomorrow's dinner. You set the kneading board on your lap and press the clay with the heels of your hands, forward, fold, turn, letting a steady drum cadence from the hearth's rim pace you like a metronome. Someone taps the rhythm on a hollow log, not loud, just enough so your wrists remember to breathe. Air bubbles are little stowaways. You coax them out now so they don't try to explode into legends later. The paste warms slightly under your palms, platelets aligning the way reeds lie flatter when a breeze combs a pond. You're not making pizza dough, no slapping bravado here. You're smoothing gossip into testimony. Your coil begins as a quiet snake of clay, rolled with the base of your fingers against the board, never rushed. Too thin, and it blames you for every wobble. Too thick, and it sulks into lumps. You lift one end and lay it on the base disc you made yesterday, pressing gently where the two meet, then running a damp fingertip along the seam until the join stops looking like two ideas and starts looking like one. Add the next coil atop it. Stagger the seam like bricks so stress can't find a straight road to run crack races down. The physics is bedtime simple. Clay forgives compression better than tension, so you build a wall that prefers hugging to pulling apart. The drum cadence helps you keep thickness even. Every 4 taps, Your thumb pinches and lifts. Your other hand supports from inside with a soft, rounded knuckle. You are your own anvil, the inner hand a moving hill the outer hand shapes against. No, you don't need a metal anvil. You were issued one at birth. When your knuckle grows tired, you swap to a smooth riverstone warmed in palm leaf shade, rolling it softly inside the riser while the outside hand paddles with a short wooden beater. The beater is not for punishment, it's for persuasion. You named it the diplomat because it negotiates lumps into citizens. One clean fact to keep nearby like a friendly ladle. Across the long Jomon timeline, coils and paddling leave traces you can still see on many shards, finger ridges inside, paddle marks outside. Proof that hand building, not wheel throwing, was the main workhorse for vessels that survive both fire and supper. Later, in some regions and periods, rims grow theatrical, what folks now call flame style, swelling and flaring like embers caught mid-leap, but even those start from the same patient stacking and compressing you're doing now. The drama is a costume. The skeleton is this drum-paced coiling. You smooth the inner wall with a slip-soaked leaf, drawing long strokes that make the surface think river instead of scaffold. Where two coils meet, you press down, not out, so you don't thin the shoulder, and invite a future sigh that ends in a line you didn't order. The rim, that future mouth, needs a plan from the start. You don't leave it to a last-minute haircut. As the body climbs, you tuck a brief rest into the rhythm, letting loom rhythm take over. Left hand holds, right hand weaves a damp cloth over the lip to keep moisture even. Coils like company, abandon one, and it shrinks faster than its neighbors and starts drama. A small joke to keep your jaw relaxed. If a bubble survives, wedging and hides in the wall, it's not a sparkle, it's a tiny saboteur planning to join the stew without bringing a spoon. You chase saboteurs now with fingertips and patience, not later with glue and regrets. Another chuckle when your coil tries to wander outward, as if it saw a bird. Nice try, you mutter, pressing it back on beat 4, because architecture should not follow flight paths. Your teacher showed you a fringe tidbit that seemed ridiculous until it worked. She called it listening with the wrist. Rest the side of your wrist against the wall and turn the vessel slowly. Where the thickness bulges, the coolness lags. Where it thins, the heat from your skin comes through quicker. It's not medical school, it's Clay's way of whispering. You mark the thin places with a tiny nail nick and add a sliver of coil their next pass. By the time lamp glow finds you, the wall feels like one even breath. Now you paddle. The paddle wears a faint cord wrapping. Yes, cord, not for show, but for grip and micro-texture. Each tap compresses the outer skin and helps drive the temper into a tighter conversation with the clay, reducing big pores that could pop under heat. You turn the pot a handspan at a time. Tap, tap, slide, tap, tap, slide. The sound like distant rain on a woven roof. Inside, your stone anvil follows, catching the blows and spreading them into the wall as a kind of massage. It's woodworking logic in Earth. Many light taps are kinder than one heroic thwack. Heroics belong in stories, not in pots. Historians still argue whether early cord-wrap paddles here served primarily to consolidate and shape, or to leave decorative marks that signaled identity, group, or mood, maybe all at once. You glance at the raised lines your own paddle leaves and decide labels can be friends, function shaking hands with meaning. Later sections will let you savor patterns for their own sake. Tonight, they're your tiny vents and grip, your microfins that help evaporation kiss the surface without stealing moisture rudely. The wall rises to your planned shoulder. You keep the curve understated. Loud forms seek attention and attract accidents in the fire. The shoulder transitions into a gentle inward lean that will tame boil-ups and send condensate back like small, polite gifts. Your coil wants to swagger into a canyon-lipped rim. You remind it that soup, especially nut broths and fish stews, prefers fewer escape plans. Modesty is a thermal strategy, not a personality flaw. You remind yourself of that, too, on bravado-heavy days. In the workspace around you, rolls braid again. A friend turns fibers into fresh sennit for binding a lid handle later. A neighbor hums counterpoint to the drum, keeping your hands from speeding on the easy parts and dawdling on tricky ones. Someone's child becomes the official seam spotter, rewarded with a laugh each time they point to a join you forgot to press. No one is excluded from useful attention. Who coils and who drums changes by the day. Strength here is shared like firelight. Another fact, this one placed like a small pebble on the rim. By the middle Jōmon, many regions see deeper pots with stronger shoulders and, in some areas, dramatic rims. Residue analyses on some shards suggest a long romance with simmering aquatic foods and nut pastes. Scales of use that match what your wall and rim are trying to be good at. You don't need the lab terms to taste the logic. A steady simmer, a patient wall, a rim designed to escort droplets home. Water management is your backstage crew. Every so often, you mist your hands, not the wall, then pass that moisture into the surface with a smoothing stroke. If a coil shines like a mirror, it's too wet and will slump. If it chalks, it's too dry and will crack from jealousy. You keep the window of leather-hard tomorrow, loyal in the fire next week, open by turning the vessel every few minutes so wind across courtyards doesn't flirt with just one side. A damp cloth drapes the rim when you step away, the fabric's loom rhythm visible in the light, threads like quiet rails keeping your curve on track. A third small joke arrives, uninvited but helpful. When you fuss at a tiny wobble that only you can see, the pot says, "Are we building a home for dinner or auditioning for sculpture?" You apologize to the pot and to yourself and return to evenness instead of perfection. Evenness survives fire, perfection writes angry letters. You scallop two small lugs just below the rim, not ears exactly, more like gentle shoulders for a cord, so the pot can be lifted from a hearth safely when life asks for shuffling. Their attachment points are broad, their transitions soft, because sharp junctions are invitations for cracks to brag. You rake the inner wall lightly with a rib to remind it to grip sources and to make micropaths for steam to travel without hammering a single spot. Lastly, you comb the outer skin with a whisper of cord, more for evaporation management than a signature, though someone will recognize your light hand long after you sleep. A question you set down without arguing with it tonight. Historians still argue whether this suite of coiling, paddling, and ribbing techniques arrived wholly from local invention or traveled on slow currents of influence from the continent's deep ceramic traditions, then grew into distinct archipelago dialects. You let that discussion rest beside the fire like a friendly visitor. Influence or invention, your hands still have to compress a seam before supper. By late day, the vessel stands shoulder-high against your palm. You cradle it under palm leaf shade to slow the first breath of drying, never in the sun's direct stare, and settle it on a board dusted with sand so the base can move a little as it decides to be round for the long term. You smooth the last thumbprint from the rim, then leave one small, deliberate fingerprint on the inner lip, a maker's joke and a future reminder when your hand finds it during washing. You were here, and patience worked. Lamp glow will greet the pot soon, and you'll turn it gently every few breaths so edges don't race ahead of the belly. For now, the drum cadence fades to a slow heartbeat. The board creaks kindly as you lift it. The air smells like river and tomorrow's stew. Your wrists rest. Your wall rests. The diplomat paddle goes back to its hook, smug and useful. No heroic speeches. Just a vessel that already knows how to share stress the way a good story shares silence, generously, evenly, with room for simmering to happen without anyone cracking first. Your palm finds the paddle with its faint cord wrap, the same diplomat you praised yesterday, and you think of the wall not as blank skin, but as a field ready for gentle grooves to grow. You wet a short braided cord, dust it with a whisper of ash so it won't cling, and press it to the leather-hard surface in slow, breathing strokes. The cord bites and releases, leaving parallel ridges like tiny terraces. When wind across courtyards wanders through the doorway, that texture will feel like a set of steps the air can climb, and later, over the fire, those steps will host droplets that gather and walk home along lines instead of leaping for the rim. You work with a rhythm closer to loom rhythm than drum now, back and forth, steady warp and weft in your hands. The marks are not shouting, they are murmurs. You angle them slightly upward, so any kettle steam that condenses outside will read the slope and stroll downward, not pool and shout at one spot. Inside, the wall remains smooth where soups prefer to glide. Outside, you're carving micro-roads for water and heat to share, trading slickness for grip, not beauty for function. The cord remembers its life as fiber and becomes a translator between air and clay. You pause to watch the ash-dusted cord in lamp glow and offer one clean fact to keep your thoughts anchored. The very word Jōmon comes from cord-marked, a name made common in the late 19th century when scholars recognized how widely rope impressions characterize these ancient vessels. The label is modern, but the practice under your fingers is older than most stories we try to make it fit into. You smile at the oddity, a whole era name for what you're doing with your wrist right now. Texture also steadies hands. When stew is ready and the pot's flanks wear a sheen of condensation and friendly grease, those ridges keep fingers honest. Smooth walls lie charmingly. Cord marks tell the truth to wet palms. Your earlier self, who lugged driftwood with damp hands, thanks your present self, who is raising grip from clay. A small joke keeps the jaw easy. You mutter, not a basket cosplaying as a pot, and the wall seems to smirk. On the physics side of bedtime, increasing surface area speeds evaporation where you want cooling and slows it where you don't, because the grooves break up a film of water into beads that can move. The ridges also spread thermal stress sideways, tiny speed bumps for heat, so no one patch has to carry the entire conversation with the fire. When you lift the pot to a warm shelf, remember, never the sun stare. You feel with your wrist for thickness and glance for even shadow in the grooves. Light and touch conspire to warn you if a spot rushes to dry alone. The ridges act like the faint ripples in a cistern. They make motion visible, so you can be kind before a problem has a chance to speak loudly. A fringe tidbit drifts in from a grandmother's trick book. Chill the cord in water scented with a few pine needles before pressing on very warm afternoons. The resin's whisper keeps the threads from grabbing too eagerly, and the coolness buys you a few extra breaths of clean release. She swore the needles made the pattern crisper. Maybe it's chemistry, maybe it's luck, maybe it's just the way a good smell slows hands down. You try it, and your lines behave as if they've practiced, which is often what we mean when we say magic. You return to the shoulder and give the grooves a different angle there, like cross-hatching a thought so it doesn't slip. Where the wall must welcome a lid or leaf, you lighten your pressure until the pattern becomes more suggestion than fact. You want condensate guided, not trapped. In the narrow world between too much texture, which turns soot into clingy armor, and too little, which turns the pot into a slippery sermon, you find a middle path by listening to the beater's note. Tap the diplomat paddle, tap, slide, tap, and the sound tells you when the skin has tightened into a polite drum. If the pitch jumps in a bright, brittle way, you stop. That's clay asking for a sip of rest. Your steps around the workspace leave sandal crunch in the dust by the door. A friend strings fresh cord for the next paddle, turning fiber into a loose spiral with fingers that make everything look like music. Another sets a tray of small test tiles near the door, where a crossbreeze can walk between them evenly. Children admire the pattern as if it were writing. In a way, it is. A message to water and heat, a letter to your future self, carrying the instructions, grip here and let beads travel there. You lean the pot so light skims across the ridges and you can inspect without touching. Clay dust in sunbeams earlier taught you how small things show themselves best at an angle. Now lamp glow does the same job at night. You smooth one loud ridge with a rib, no need to give soot a place to hold grudges, and leave the rest to whisper. The marks will take smoke kindly. Later, that smoke becomes a seasoning skin that helps tomorrow's stew begin in a calmer mood. One more fact to lay gently on the shelf. In some middle Jomon regions, especially in the north, makers elaborated rims into flame-style silhouettes, flares and points like tongues of fire, frozen in choreography, while the bodies below still wore practical corded skins. Residue studies on many of those bodies still find aquatic fats and nut pastes clinging in microscopic films, exactly the meals that favor steady simmer over boil and benefit from walls that breathe evenly. You give your pot's shoulder a tiny approving tap and picture all those dinners quietly agreeing with your pattern. Of course, the human part of pattern won't sit still for long. Historians still argue whether particular arrangements of chord marks, angles, bands, nested chevrons, spoke clan or kin, marked seasons, or simply pleased the maker's eye more than the alternatives, with thermal help as a bonus rather than the aim. You leave the quarrel beside the fire to keep warm. You are happy to let function hold hands with meaning. A grip that also says ours. A cooling aid that also says home. A tiny aside to relax your breath. Measure with your eyes, not your anxiety. If a band wanders a finger's width, the stew will not file a complaint. The fire does not carry a ruler. It carries mood. You keep the mood friendly by keeping the pattern continuous enough for water to read and calm enough for soot to settle without sulking. At the base, where walls meet the disc, you press a denser field of short marks, like stippling under a sketch. If a boil gets ambitious, and isn't ambition lovely in soup, just not along the rim, those base grooves give outside moisture a reason to linger, spreading warmth out along the skirt. Later, when you set the vessel on 3 stones, those tiny grooves welcome the wind's touch and make the air move under the belly like a polite servant who knows when to appear and when to vanish. You lay the cord aside and pick up a simple shell. Along the rim's inner lip, you stroke one quiet channel. It's barely visible, a shadow line, but it will return droplets to the stew the way a garden path returns footsteps to a door. Your earlier lesson, rotate the rim a finger's width now and then, returns, and you turn the board so drying behaves like a fair game, not a race. Shade, again, is a tool, so you return the pot to palm leaf shade with the grooves facing the faint breeze. The air reads your script and behaves. As the evening deepens, starlight gathers outside, and you grin at the thought that last week you used stars to steer a canoe, and tonight you use cords to steer water. Different maps, same humility. A neighbor hums a soft cadence that isn't quite a drum, more a lull for hands. You clean the ash from the braid, coil it for next time, and oil the paddle lashing so the diplomat rides another day. The wall, now textured and calm, holds the memory of your morning's temper tests and your afternoon's patience. You set the pot among its quiet siblings, each with its own pattern of persuasion, and step back until the grooves blur into tone. Nothing cracks, nothing complains. The air moves with you, low and sure. Tomorrow you'll plan the hearth geometry around these textures. Tonight, you let the mark speak to the room the way ripples speak to a cistern, signals without urgency, direction without drama, invitations for heat and water to behave like good guests. You bank the coals, smile at the whisper-clean lines you've pressed, and let your shoulders fall. The cord has finished its sentence. The wall is ready to listen. You squat by the hearth and begin arranging the night's geometry. 3 stones, a ring of ash, and 2 small doorways where air can stroll like a polite guest. You've learned to think of the fire pit as a courtyard in miniature. Wind across courtyards needs paths, not orders, and the pot prefers a breeze that wanders under its belly, instead of a gust that slaps one patch of wall. With your knuckle, you nudge the first stone, so its shoulder bears the pot's weight. The second stone finds its plane. The third completes the tripod, because 3 points always agree on what level means, even when the floor daydreams. The tripod makes a table, the ash makes a cushion, the doorways make a conversation between flame and air. You build the fire in layers, not in a heap. Kindling at the upwind door, thicker sticks toward the leeward, a lane of empty space beneath the pot where heat can pass without headbutting clay. Convection will do what it loves. Warm air rises, cooler air slides in to visit, so you give it a hallway. You remember last night's cord marks and smile. Those micro-terraces will welcome droplets outside while this air path welcomes warmth below. Different scripts, same kindness. Write the flow you want, then get out of its way. One clean fact to set by the stones like a 4th helper. At the middle Jomon settlement of Sannai-Maruyama in northern Honshu, houses with clay or stone-lined hearths show how central the cooking fire was to daily life. Archaeologists have mapped multiple such hearths across pit dwellings, dated to the 4th and 3rd millennia BCE. You don't recite the dates aloud at the coals, fires prefer stories to numbers, but knowing that old rooms shared this same slow problem-solving lets your shoulders drop. People figured this out and then kept figuring it out, because dinner is a stubborn teacher and clay is a patient student. You test the cross-draft with a pinch of ash. Sprinkle, watch. If the ash lifts and flows under the belly of the pot, the doors are gossiping properly. If it sulks in a corner, you widen the upwind mouth a thumb's width. Small motions, big moods. A half-joke slips in before your jaw tries to clench. A hearth is just a wind instrument that happens to make soup. You fancy yourself a calm flautist. The fire, flattered, sings back in a low register. The physics tonight stays lullaby simple. Radiation warms what it can see. Conduction warms what it touches. Convection does the invisible transporting. Your stones buffer conduction, so no single spot of the pot's skirt gets interrogated. The ash ring diffuses radiation from below, turning hot dots into soft halos. The doors tune convection so hot air strokes the curve instead of scolding it. If you want a one-line rule, it's this: spread the attention. You set a practice you love. 2 zones of heat. To the side, a preheat nest for wood and a place where the pot can loiter when you raise the fire or when stew threatens excitement. At center, the working stage where simmer lives. With a stick, you ferry coals from one to the other, never asking the pot to leap from winter to summer in one breath. Remember the cistern trick: touch water and watch ripples speak. Tonight, the ripple is in the coals. A small push here, a small pull there, and the glow evens out until the underbelly hums like lamp glow turned into warmth. A fringe tidbit from an elder who half whispered his lessons. Tuck a flat whistler pebble just inside the downwind door. If airflow is right, it makes the faintest hum as gases slip past, the sound you can hear only when you're listening for kindness. He said the pebble sings when the pot is safe. Maybe it's luck. Maybe it's the same physics that makes reeds murmur. Either way, the song has saved more dinners than bragging ever did. You place your pebble. A breath later, the quiet note arrives. Your shoulders answer, lower. You rotate the pot a finger's width every few minutes, the way you rotated it at the fire's edge during first steaming. Not a spin, just a courtly turn. The rim, which you planned modestly yesterday, now shows its manners. Its inward lean discourages boil escape plans. Droplets condense and slide home along the shell-scraped channel you cut under lamp glow. You watch for the line where wall meets flame's gaze. If it blushes too fast, you lift the pot to the preheat nest, feed the hearth a small branch, and return the pot only when the blush looks more like a slow smile. The social choreography moves around you. The firekeeper, tonight it's your quiet cousin with the patient wrists, tends the doors and drags a coal here, a coal there. 2 others break longer sticks into handspan lengths, because long sticks turn hearths into argument. A child becomes the door watcher, eyes on the upwind mouth to warn if gusts start to brag. No role feels noble or low. They braid. A joke goes around that the 3rd stone is always a diva. The 3rd stone, taking the hint, settles. Another clean fact to tuck where your spoon hand can reach it. In some regions and periods, pot supports, stone tripods, ring bases, or simple clay bars show up in the record and in reconstructions, hinting at varied ways to raise vessels above flame and let air play under. You don't insist that all Jomon households stage their hearths the same way, coast and upland, winter and summer, feast and everyday supper, each invite different arrangements. Historians still argue whether certain standing stone sets were strictly cooking supports or multi-purpose fixtures with social signals folded in. You let that debate warm itself by your coals and continue making dinner. The ash blanket becomes your thermostat. Too thin, and the pot hears the hiss of little tempers. Too thick, and the fire naps and refuses to speak. With a flat stick, you comb ash into waves, a Zen garden for hungry people. The pattern lowers hot spots and raises low ones until the whole face below looks like a quiet sky. You had thought the loom rhythm lived only in weaving. Now you see it in ash, parallel strokes that guide a flow you can't see but absolutely feel in the pot's voice. You rescue the stew from ambition twice. Once when bubbles crowd a corner and try to lift the lid, and once when you get cocky and add a fistful of chestnuts all at once. You apologize, and the pot forgives you. The fix is the same as it was at Clay's stage. Evenness, not drama. A sliver of wood under the shy stone to raise one shoulder. A coal scooped aside to let the blush soften. A breath, a stir with the back of the ladle. A check at the doors to make sure air still prefers a quiet walk to a sprint. Another small joke nudges your jaw loose. Blasting air through a blowpipe might wake the fire and crack the pot out of pure indignation. The hearth is not a blacksmith's trumpet, it's a kitchen. You use your breath to encourage, not to scold. The pot appreciates the manners and replies by not becoming a lesson in what not to do. By now, kettle steam has become a steady script along the outside, beads gathering at the corded terraces and reading the slope you set yesterday. Inside, the stew moves like a slow crowd, no elbows. You lift the pot for a moment, those low lugs earning their keep, and set it down again on a rearranged tripod where heat now feels like a soft hand under the belly. The rim stays untroubled. The wall sings, but softly. You end where you began, with paths, doors for air, lanes for heat, terraces for droplets, a ring for ash, a plan for rotation. Nothing showy, everything shared. If the hearth were a village, you've just made it walkable. If the pot were a person, you've just kept your promise to never ask it to sprint uphill in sandals. You turn your ear to the whistler pebble. It hums. You let that small note hold the room together while the stew decides it is ready to be kind. Now the fire folds itself into low, even glow, and the doors you tended breathe more quietly, trading drafts for a soft exchange that feels like warm wind crossing a calm courtyard at dusk. The tripod stones settle, losing their edge, and the ash you combed lies smooth as a quiet shore after the tide has thought better of returning. Inside the pot, movement drifts from simmer to gentle sway, and along the corded terraces, beads find their way home without hurry. You draw a long, unbroken breath, and the room joins you. Light slips from flame orange toward lamp glow, and every outline softens. In this slower air, the small sounds remain. An ember's sigh, a wooden spoon's light tap, but they space themselves out until each one is a reassurance, not a request. Heat has stopped asking for anything. Clay has stopped bracing for anything. Even the little whistler pebble forgets to sing, which is how you know the balance holds without needing proof. Let the lid rest. Let the doors rest. Let your shoulders rest. When you finally taste from the ladle, the stew feels like sleep becoming flavor, and the pot under it feels steady as a friend's hand.